Hercule Poirot serves as the murderer who almost won. Chapter 1. The Whisper of a Perfect Crime. Hercule Poirot sat in his impeccably tidy London flat, the morning sun filtering through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished mahogany table. His breakfast, a single boiled egg, a slice of toast, and a cup of steaming hot chocolate, sat untouched. His attention was wholly absorbed by a letter, held delicately between manicured fingers. The envelope, plain and unadorned save for a postmark from Kent, had arrived with the dawn post. Its contents were anything but ordinary. The letter was typed, a detail that piqued Poirot's curiosity at once. No flourish of handwriting, no telltale quirks of personality revealed in the strokes of a pen. The words themselves were chilling. In their brevity, Monsieur Poirot, a crime is coming. A murder so perfect, not even you will unravel it. Watch the shadows. They move when you do not look. A friend Poirot's moustache twitched as he read the words again, his sharp grey eyes narrowing. A challenge, a taunt, or perhaps a warning. He tapped the letter against the table, the rhythm steady as his thoughts raced. Mon ami, he murmured to himself, this is no idle jest. Non, there is intent here. He rose, pacing the room with the precision of a metronome. The letter was bold, too bold to be the work of a mere prankster. Yet it lacked specifics. No names, no dates, no place. Only the vague menace of shadows. Poirot disliked vagueness. It offended his sense of order, his need for clarity, but he could not dismiss it. The writer knew his name, his reputation. That alone demanded his attention. By noon, Poirot had resolved to act. He summoned his faithful companion, Captain Hastings, who arrived with his usual enthusiasm, his face alight with curiosity. I say, Poirot, what's this about a letter? Sounds dashed mysterious. Poirot handed him the note, watching as Hastings's brow furrowed. Good Lord, Hastings muttered. Sounds like some blighters trying to get under your skin. What do you make of it? I make nothing. Yet, Poirot replied, his voice calm but firm. But I feel, Hastings, the stirring of something dark. This friend does not write for amusement. There is a mind at work, calculating precise. We must be ready. Hastings nodded, though his expression betrayed unease. But where do we start? There's nothing to go on. Poirot smiled faintly, a gleam in his eye. Au contraire, mon cher, there is always something. The postmark, Kent, a clue, however small. And the typewriter, a machine leaves traces, no? We shall inquire, discreetly. That afternoon, Poirot and Hastings boarded a train to Kent, the countryside rolling past in a blur of green and gold. Poirot's mind was far from the scenery. He thought of the letter's tone, confident, almost mocking. Whoever wrote it believed themselves untouchable. That Poirot knew was their first mistake. As the train neared the small town of Ashbourne, Poirot's gaze settled on the horizon. Somewhere in this quiet corner of England, a shadow was indeed moving, and Hercule. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Drawing Room. The train deposited Poirot and Hastings in Ashbourne as dusk settled over the town, painting the cobblestone streets in hues of violet and amber. Their destination was Ashbourne Hall, a sprawling manor owned by Sir Reginald Carver, a retired diplomat with a reputation for lavish gatherings. Poirot had learned, through discreet inquiries at the post office, that the mysterious letter's postmark aligned with the Manor's weekly mail collection. It was a tenuous thread, but Poirot's instincts urged him to follow it. The hall loomed against the twilight, its ivy-clad walls and towering chimneys exuding old wealth and older secrets. A butler, stiff as a statue, ushered them into a grand foyer where crystal chandeliers glittered like frozen stars. Sir Reginald, a portly man with a florid face and a booming laugh, greeted them warmly. "Monsieur Poirot, an honour, truly, and Captain Hastings, welcome. Come, join us for dinner. We've a lively crowd tonight." Poirot inclined his head, his eyes already scanning the room. "You are most kind, Sir Reginald. I trust we do not intrude." "Intrude? Nonsense!" Sir Reginald clapped Poirot's shoulder, oblivious to the detective's slight wince. "The more, the merrier." The drawing-room buzzed with conversation as guests mingled, their voices a tapestry of accents and tones. Poirot noted each face, his mind cataloguing details with mechanical precision. There was Lady Evelyn Carver, Sir Reginald's elegant wife, her smile polished, but her eyes restless. Dr. Malcolm Trent, a physician with a sharp gaze and a habit of tapping his glass. Miss Clara Beaumont, a young heiress whose laughter seemed forced. Mr. Victor Langley, a businessman with a sly grin and ink-stained fingers. And Mrs. Dorothea Finch, an elderly widow whose pearls clicked softly as she moved, her stare unnervingly direct. Hastings leaned close, whispering, "Quite the assortment, eh, Poirot? Anyone strike you as our letter-writer?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Patience, Hastings. The letter spoke of shadows. Shadows do not reveal themselves in the light of introductions. Dinner was a sumptuous affair. Roast pheasant, glazed vegetables, and wines that flowed like rivers. Yet Poirot ate sparingly, his attention on the undercurrents beneath the table's chatter. Lady Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. Dr. Trent exchanged a glance with Miss Beaumont, fleeting but heavy. Langley's jests carried an edge, and Mrs. Finch watched them all like a hawk circling prey. As dessert was served, Sir Reginald rose, glass in hand. "A toast to good company and better nights." The room echoed his cheer, but Poirot's gaze caught something. A flicker of movement beyond the tall windows. A silhouette, there and gone, swallowed by the dark. He excused himself, murmuring about needing air, and slipped into the garden. The night was cool, the air thick with the scent of roses. His shoes crunched on gravel as he moved toward where the figure had stood. Nothing. No footprints, no trace, only the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Returning to the dining room, Poirot found the mood unchanged, the guests oblivious to his absence. But his mind was alight. Someone in this room, or just beyond it, knew he was here. The letter was no idle threat. The game had begun, and Chapter 3. The Clock That Lied. The following morning, Ashbourne Hall awoke to a scream that shattered the stillness. It came from the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books and heavy oak furniture. Poirot, already dressed in his immaculate suit, was sipping coffee in the breakfast parlour when the sound reached him. Hastings leapt to his feet, but Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm yet alert. "Come, mon ami, we investigate." They arrived to find Lady Evelyn, pale as porcelain, clutching the door frame. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the floor where Mr. Victor Langley lay sprawled, a trickle of blood pooling beneath his head. A bronze statuette smeared with crimson rested nearby. The room was silent save for the steady tick of a grandfather. Clock in the corner, its hands frozen at 3:15. Dr. Trent pushed past the gathering crowd, kneeling beside Langley. "He's dead," he pronounced after a moment, his voice clipped. "Blunt trauma. Likely instantaneous." Poirot's gaze swept the scene, his mind a whirl of observation. The statuette was from a nearby shelf, its base heavy enough to kill. Langley's suit was rumpled, a glass of brandy overturned on the rug beside him. The window was latched, the curtains undisturbed. Yet something felt wrong. "Too staged, too neat, Dr. Trent," Poirot said, his tone mild. "You are certain of the time of death?" Trent frowned. "Well, I'd need a proper examination, but rigor's just setting in. I'd wager within the last few hours, say, between midnight and 3. Poirot nodded, his eyes drifting to the clock. "Curious," he murmured, stepping closer. The clock's face was ornate, its mechanism exposed behind a glass panel. He tilted his head, noting a faint irregularity in the gears. "Hastings, fetch Sir Reginald, s'il vous plaît." As Hastings hurried off, Poirot questioned the guests who had gathered in a tense knot. Lady Evelyn claimed she'd retired at 11, hearing nothing. Miss Beaumont said she'd been in her room, reading until midnight. Mrs. Finch, her voice sharp, insisted she'd slept soundly after taking her usual tonic. Sir Reginald, when he arrived, confirmed he'd locked the house at 10, as was his habit. "And you, Dr. Trent?" Poirot asked, his eyes piercing. Trent shifted. "I was up late, reviewing notes in my room. Fell asleep around 1, I think." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Merci. Now, let us consider this clock." He tapped the glass, and a faint click sounded. With a gloved finger, he nudged the minute hand. It moved freely, too freely. "This clock, mes amis, has been tampered with. It does not tell the hour of death. It tells what someone wishes us to believe." A murmur rippled through the group. Hastings, back at Poirot's side, whispered, "You think the killer set it to mislead us?" "Précisément," Poirot replied softly. "But why 3:15? Why not another hour? There is meaning here, Hastings. A lie told by a clock is a clue in itself." As the police were summoned and the body removed, Poirot lingered, his gaze returning to the statuette. A single hair, barely visible, clung to its edge. Dark, unlike Langley's grey. He plucked it with a handkerchief, his mind racing. The letter had promised a perfect crime. This was bold, but not flawless. The killer was close, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, chasing. Chapter 4. Footprints in the Fog. The dawn after Victor Langley's murder draped Ashbourne Hall in a thick, clinging fog, the kind that muffled sound and blurred edges until the world seemed a dream. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the Manor's garden, his polished shoes damp from the grass, his eyes fixed on the ground. He had slipped away from the house before breakfast, driven by a nagging suspicion that the library's locked window and tampered clock were only part of the story. "Hastings," he called softly, knowing his friend trailed behind. "Observez! The earth, it speaks when we listen." Hastings, rubbing sleep from his eyes, squinted at the muddy path. "I don't see much, Poirot, just a lot of wet dirt." Poirot's moustache curled slightly. "Non, mon ami, look closer." He pointed to a faint impression in the soil, half obscured by the fog's damp caress. A partial footprint, shallow but distinct, leading from the library's exterior wall toward the woods beyond. The print was small, perhaps a woman's, though the heel's shape suggested a dress shoe, not a boot. "This," Poirot said, "is not the mark of a gardener. It is fresh, made last night." Hastings crouched, his brow furrowing. "You think the killer came this way, but the window was latched from the inside." "Précisément," Poirot replied, his voice low, "which makes this print all the more intriguing. Come, we follow." The trail led them through the garden, where roses bowed under the fog's weight, and into a copse of elms, their branches skeletal against the mist. The footprints grew fainter, as if the maker had stepped lightly, aware of pursuit. Poirot moved with purpose, his small frame navigating the uneven ground with surprising agility. Hastings struggled to keep pace, muttering about the cold. At the edge of a clearing, the trail vanished. The ground here was harder, strewn with pine needles that hid any trace. Poirot stopped, his head tilted, as if listening to the fog itself. "Curieux," he murmured. "They stop, but where do they go?" Hastings scanned the clearing. "Maybe they doubled back, or climbed a tree." Poirot shook his head. "Non, the mind that wrote that letter does not climb trees like a squirrel. They planned this." He knelt, brushing aside needles until his fingers grazed something cold, a tiny silver charm shaped like a crescent moon, half buried in the earth. He held it up, its surface catching the faint light. A trinket, perhaps from a bracelet, careless for one so careful. "Whose is it?" Hastings asked, leaning in. "That we shall discover," Poirot said, pocketing the charm. "But it tells us something already. Our killer is not a phantom. They walk, they drop things, they make mistakes." As they retraced their steps, the fog began to lift, revealing the manner's silhouette in the distance. Poirot's mind churned. The footprint suggested someone had been outside the library, yet the locked window implied no entry or exit that way. Was the print a deliberate misdirection, like the clock? Or had the killer slipped in and out another way, unseen? Back at the hall, the guests were gathered in the morning room, their faces drawn with suspicion and fear. Lady Evelyn clutched a handkerchief, her eyes red. Dr. Trent stood apart, his arms crossed. Miss Beaumont's hands fidgeted, her bracelet noticeably absent a charm. Mrs. Finch watched them all, her gaze as sharp as ever. Poirot said nothing, but his little grey cells hummed. The footprint, the charm, the fog, they were pieces of a puzzle, and the picture was beginning to form. The murderer had stepped into the light, if only for a moment, and Poirot would not let. Chapter 5. The alibi unravelled. The morning fog had burned away, leaving Ashbourne Hall bathed in pale sunlight that did little to warm the tension in the morning room. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the guests with the precision of a watchmaker. The silver crescent charm rested in his pocket, a silent accusation, but he was not yet ready to reveal it. First, he needed to test the web of stories spun around Victor Langley's death. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We are all agreed that Monsieur Langley met his end in the library, oui? Yet the clock, it lies, the window, it remains locked. And so I ask, where were you, each of you, between midnight and 3? Lady Evelyn shifted in her seat, her voice trembling. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was in my room asleep. The house was quiet." Dr. Trent nodded curtly. "As I said, I was reviewing notes until 1, then to bed. My room's on the east wing, nowhere near the library." Miss Clara Beaumont clutched her teacup, her fingers bare of any bracelet. "I was reading. Jane Austen, if you must know. I didn't hear a thing." Mrs. Finch's eyes glinted. "My tonic puts me out like a light by 10. I'd have slept through an earthquake." Sir Reginald, hovering near the door, cleared his throat. "Locked up at 10 as always. I was in my study until 11:30, then bed. Didn't stir till the scream." Poirot's gaze lingered on each face, searching for the telltale flicker of deceit. "And yet," he said softly, "someone was not where they claim. Let us consider, for example, Dr. Trent." Trent stiffened, his jaw tightening. "What's that supposed to mean?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "You say you were in your room reviewing notes. Yet, when I passed the east wing at 12:30, on my way for a glass of water, you understand, I saw no light beneath your door. Curious for a man so diligently at work." A flush crept up Trent's neck. I may have finished earlier. It's hard to recall exactly." "Hard to recall?" Poirot's tone was gentle, but his eyes were sharp as needles. A man of medicine with a mind for detail forgets such a thing? No, I think not. Hastings, standing by the window, whispered, "You're rattling him, Poirot." Poirot ignored him, pressing on. "And then there is the matter of the library's brandy glass. Overturned, yes, but the stain on the rug, it was dry by morning. This suggests it spilled hours before the body was found. Dr. Trent, you are a man who enjoys brandy, are you not?" Trent's hands clenched. "So do half the men here. That proves nothing." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "but it raises questions. If you were not in your room, where were you? Near the library, perhaps, when Monsieur Langley fell." A gasp escaped Lady Evelyn. Miss Beaumont's cup clattered in its saucer. Mrs. Finch's lips pursed, as if savouring the drama. Trent rose, his voice low. "You're fishing, Poirot. I wasn't there. I swear it." Poirot smiled faintly. "Swearing is for courts, Doctor. I seek only truth." As Trent sat, visibly shaken, Poirot's mind turned to the charm in his pocket. Miss Beaumont's bare wrist was damning, but Trent's crumbling alibi was a crack in the facade. The murderer had planned carefully, but no plan was perfect. The footprint in the fog, the tampered clock, and now a lie exposed. They were threads, and Poirot was weaving them together. "Lunch will be served soon," Sir Reginald announced, breaking the silence. "Let's try to keep calm." The guests dispersed, but Poirot lingered, his eyes on Trent's retreating figure. "Hastings," he murmured, "the alibi unravels. but the motive remains hidden. We are close, but not close enough." Hastings nodded. "What's next?" Poirot's gaze hardened. "We watch, mon ami. The killer will move again. They must. And when they do—" Chapter 6. Masquerade of Motives. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Ashbourne Hall, casting long shadows across the parlour where the guests had gathered after lunch. The air was heavy with unspoken accusations, each glance between them laced with suspicion. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his fingers steepled, his eyes moving from face to face like a painter studying a canvas. Victor Langley's murder had cracked the polished surface of their lives, and now the raw undercurrents were spilling out. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice slicing through the tense silence. "A man is dead, and yet we speak in circles. To find the killer, we must uncover why Monsieur Langley was a target. Tell me, what did he mean to each of you?" Lady Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was a friend. Charming, always. He'd been a guest here before." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "A friend, Lady Evelyn, or perhaps more. I have heard whispers of letters, private letters, exchanged between you." Her face drained of colour. "That's preposterous. I never—" "Enough," Sir Reginald interrupted, his voice gruff. "Langley was a guest, nothing more. Don't drag my wife's name into this, Poirot." Poirot inclined his head, but his eyes did not waver. "Very well. Let us turn to Dr. Trent." He shifted his focus to the physician, who sat rigid, his jaw tight. "You and Monsieur Langley were seen arguing 2 nights ago in the garden. A heated exchange, non? Over what?" Trent's eyes flickered with unease. "It was nothing. A professional disagreement. He questioned my judgment on a medical matter." "A medical matter?" Poirot's tone was deceptively mild. "Or perhaps a matter of money. Langley was a wealthy man, and I understand you have debts, Doctor." A murmur rippled through the room. Trent's hands clenched. "That's irrelevant. I didn't kill him." Poirot moved on, undeterred, his gaze settling on Miss Clara Beaumont. "And you, mademoiselle, you smiled at Monsieur Langley often, yet I sense no grief in your eyes. Was he perhaps an obstacle to you?" Clara's laugh was sharp, brittle. "An obstacle? Hardly. He was just persistent. Always flirting, always pushing. I wasn't interested." "Yet you accepted his gifts," Poirot said softly, recalling a whispered rumour from a maid about a sapphire brooch. "Why keep them, if he meant so little?" Clara's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. Poirot turned to Mrs. Finch, whose piercing stare had not left him. "Madam Finch, you watched Monsieur Langley closely. What did you see that others missed?" The old woman's lips curled, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Langley was a snake, charmed everyone, but I saw him slip papers into his pocket after a card game. Cheating, I'd wager. Or worse." Hastings, standing by the door, leaned toward Poirot. "Good Lord, Poirot, they all had reason to hate him." "Oui, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "and that is the puzzle. Too many motives, like masks at a masquerade." "Which is true? Which hides the killer?" He rose, pacing slowly. "Langley was not merely a guest. He was a catalyst, stirring jealousy, greed, fear. Someone in this room saw him as a threat too, great to ignore, and that someone struck, believing their secret safe. The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down. Lady Evelyn's handkerchief was a crumpled knot. Trent's knuckles were white. Clara's eyes darted to the door, as if longing to flee. Mrs. Finch's gaze remained steady, unyielding. Poirot paused by the window, glancing at the garden beyond. The footprint, the charm, Trent's broken alibi. They were fragments, but the motive was the key. "Tonight," he said, turning back, "we dine together again, and I will watch, for the one who hides behind their mask will betray themselves. They always do." As the guests dispersed, Hastings whispered, "You're tightening the noose, aren't you?" Poirot's smile was faint but resolute. "The noose, Hastings, is already around them." Chapter 7. The Cipher in the Candlelight, Dinner at Ashbourne Hall. That evening was a strained affair. The clink of silverware and murmur of forced pleasantries barely masking the undercurrent of dread. Hercule Poirot sat at the long mahogany table, his eyes flickering between the guests as candlelight danced across their faces, casting shadows that seemed to writhe with secrets. The memory of Victor Langley's crumpled body in the library hung over them all, an unspoken spectre. As dessert was served poached pears glistening in syrup, Poirot's attention was drawn to a small detail he had overlooked earlier. Beside Langley's overturned brandy glass in the library, there had been a scrap of paper, scorched at one edge, tucked beneath a book. He had retrieved it during the afternoon, unnoticed by the others, and now it burned in his mind as much as in his pocket. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice cutting through a lull in conversation. "A crime such as this leaves traces, no? Not only in blood or footprints, but in the mind of the one who planned it. I wonder, has anyone found something curious since last night?" The guests exchanged glances, some wary, others puzzled. Lady Evelyn's fork paused mid-air. "What do you mean, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice tight. Poirot's moustache twitched. A trifle, perhaps, a note, a mark, a message left behind. He watched their faces closely, noting the flicker of unease in Dr. Trent's eyes, the sudden stillness of Miss Beaumont's hands. Mrs. Finch snorted softly. "If there's a message, it's probably Langley's own scheming come back to haunt him." "Perhaps," Poirot said, reaching into his pocket. He produced the scorched scrap, holding it delicately between gloved fingers. "But this I found in the library. It is intriguing." The paper was small, no larger than a calling card, with a series of letters scrawled in black ink, X4T9L2. Below them, faintly visible, was a single word, half-burned, shadow. The guests leaned forward, curiosity overcoming caution. "What on earth is it?" Sir Reginald boomed, squinting at the scrap. "A cipher," Poirot replied, his tone measured. "A code meant for someone, or meant to mislead. The question is, who wrote it, and why leave it where it could be found?" Dr. Trent cleared his throat. "Could be nonsense. Langley was always doodling. Business notes, you know." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Nonsense, Doctor." "Non, I think not. The mind that tampered with the clock, that left a footprint in the fog, does not act without purpose. This cipher is a challenge or a mistake." Miss Beaumont's voice was sharp. "You're saying the killer left it? Why would they be so careless?" "Why, indeed," Poirot mused, folding the paper away. "Unless they wished to be seen, to play a game with Hercule Poirot. The letter I received spoke of shadows, and here the word appears again." A hush fell over the table. The candles flickered, as if stirred by an unseen breath. Hastings, seated beside Poirot, whispered, "You think it's a taunt? Like the letter?" "Oui, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his voice low. "But a taunt reveals as much as it conceals. This cipher, it is a window into their mind." He leaned back, letting the conversation resume, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The ciphers, letters, X49L2, felt like a sequence, perhaps a code for a name, a place, or a time. The burned word, shadow, echoed the letter's warning. Was it Langley's, meant for an accomplice? Or the killer's, left to mock him? As the meal ended and the guests drifted to the drawing-room, Poirot lingered, his gaze on the candelabra. The light had revealed the cipher, but it also hid truths. Someone at this table knew what X49L2 meant, and before the night was over, he vowed to crack it, or force the killer. Chapter 8. Echoes of a Stolen Past. The night deepened around Ashbourne Hall, the air thick with the scent of wax and unease. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the library, the scene of Victor Langley's murder, his fingers tracing the edge of the shelf where the bronze statuette had stood. The cipher, X49L2, lay heavy in his thoughts, its meaning still elusive despite hours of mental dissection. But another clue had emerged, one that tugged at the threads of a darker tapestry. Earlier, while the guests retired to their rooms, Poirot had spoken with the housekeeper, Mrs. Harrow, a woman whose sharp memory rivaled her starched apron. She had recalled a name mentioned by Langley in passing weeks ago, Elliot Vane. The name stirred a faint echo in Poirot's mind. A scandal from years past, whispered in London's drawing-rooms. Vane had been a financier, disgraced after embezzling, funds vanishing before justice could catch him. Could Langley have known him? Been him? Poirot's little grey cells buzzed. He had sent Hastings to the village telegraph office with a coded message to his contacts in London, requesting any record of Vane's associates. Now, as the hall slept, Poirot sifted through Langley's belongings, permitted by a reluctant Sir Reginald. In a locked drawer, forced open with a hairpin and a touch of finesse, Poirot found a faded photograph. Two men, one unmistakably Langley, younger and clean-shaven, standing beside a gaunt figure with piercing eyes. On the back, in faint pencil, V&E, Cairo, 15 Cairo, Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching. A city of secrets. And you, Monsieur Langley, carried one to your grave. He pocketed the photograph and turned to a small notebook tucked beside it. Its pages were filled with numbers and initials, but one entry stood out. EV. Debt repaid. Shadow moves. The word shadow again, like a signature. Poirot's pulse quickened. Was Langley tied to Vane's disgrace? Had he been Vane, living under a false name? Or had he betrayed Vane, earning an enemy who struck years later? A creak in the corridor snapped Poirot from his thoughts. He doused the lamp and slipped behind a curtain, his breath steady. Footsteps approached, light, hesitant, then paused at the library door. A sliver of moonlight revealed Miss Clara Beaumont, her nightgown ghostly in the dark, her hands clutching a key. She moved to the desk, searching with frantic precision, unaware of Poirot's gaze. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, stepping forward. Clara gasped, the key clattering to the floor. I couldn't sleep," she stammered. "I left something here." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A curious hour for lost things. Tell me, what do you know of Elliot Vane?" Her face paled, her lips parting but no words coming. Poirot pressed gently. "Langley's past is not so buried as he thought. Nor perhaps is yours." "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Poirot retrieved the key, noting its ornate design, a match for the desk drawer. "Go, mademoiselle, but know this, the truth, it does not stay silent." As Clara fled, Poirot stood alone again, the photograph and notebook in hand. Vane's shadow stretched across the years, touching Langley, perhaps Clara, perhaps others in this house. The cipher, the charm, the footprint, they were ripples from a stone thrown long ago. And Poirot... Chapter 9. The Trap Within the Trap. The morning light filtered weakly through Ashbourne Hall's tall windows, doing little to dispel the chill that clung to its halls. Hercule Poirot sat in the morning-room, a cup of untouched tea before him, his mind a whirl of connections. Elliot Vane, the cipher X49L2, Clara Beaumont's midnight search, and the ever-present shadow of the letter's warning. The murderer was close, their steps faltering under his scrutiny, but they were cunning. To catch them, Poirot decided, he must lay a trap, one that would provoke a reaction. "Mes amis," Poirot announced as the guests gathered, their faces drawn with fatigue and suspicion. "Today I have news. Last night I found evidence in the library, a document that names the killer." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Lady Evelyn's hand flew to her throat. Dr. Trent's eyes narrowed. Clara Beaumont froze, her teacup trembling. Mrs. Finch leaned forward, her gaze like a blade. Sir Reginald spluttered, "What? Why didn't you tell the police?" Poirot raised a hand, his expression serene. "Because, Sir Reginald, the document is incomplete. It requires confirmation. I have hidden it in this house, safe for now. Tonight I will retrieve it and reveal all." Hastings, catching Poirot's eye, suppressed a grin. There was no document, only a fiction meant to stir the killer's fear. Poirot's trap was simple. Whoever sought the evidence would betray themselves. The day passed in a haze of tension. Poirot watched the guests closely, noting their movements. Lady Evelyn lingered near the library, her fingers brushing the doorframe. Trent paced the garden, glancing at the windows. Clara avoided Poirot's gaze, her hands fidgeting without her usual bracelet. Mrs. Finch, however, seemed amused, as if she sensed the game. As evening fell, Poirot made a show of retiring early, claiming a headache. Instead, he stationed himself in a shadowed alcove overlooking the library's entrance, a vantage point Hastings had scouted. The house grew quiet, the only sounds the creak of settling wood and the distant tick of a clock. At 10:30, a figure emerged. Dr. Trent, his steps cautious but purposeful. He slipped into the library, a small flashlight in hand, and began searching the desk, then the shelves. Poirot's pulse quickened, but he waited. Moments later, a second figure appeared. Clara Beaumont, her face pale, a letter opener clutched like a dagger. She hesitated at the door, then entered. Poirot moved silently, signalling Hastings, who waited nearby. Inside, Trent was rifling through books when Clara's voice cut through. "Looking for something, Doctor?" Trent spun, his flashlight catching her weapon. "Clara? What the devil? Put that down!" "Not until you tell me what you're hiding," she hissed. "I know you were in Cairo with Langley. You knew Vane." Poirot stepped into the light, his voice calm. "Enough, both of you. The trap, it seems, has caught two." Trent dropped a book, his face ashen. Clara's grip tightened, but her eyes darted to Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, I only wanted answers." "Answers," Poirot said softly, "or protection?" "Dr. Trent, you seek my document because it threatens you. Mademoiselle Beaumont, you come armed, perhaps to silence him. Yet neither of you sees the trap within the trap." He gestured to the desk, where a single candle flickered. "I placed no document, but I left a mirror, to reflect the guilty. You both moved, and now I see more clearly." Hastings blocked the door, preventing escape. Trent stammered. "This proves nothing. I was curious, that's all." Clara's voice shook. "I wasn't going to hurt him. Langley's death. It's tied to Vane, to me." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "We, and that tie binds you both. But whose hand struck the blow? That we shall uncover." As he led them back to the parlour, Poirot's mind raced. The trap had worked, but it revealed a deeper game. The killer had anticipated his move, using Trent and Clara as pawns. The shadow was still one step ahead. Chapter 10. Mirrors of Deception. The parlour of Ashbourne Hall was a cage of flickering candlelight and taut nerves as Hercule Poirot faced Dr. Trent and Clara Beaumont, their faces pale under his unrelenting gaze. The trap he had set in the library had snared them, but Poirot sensed the true killer still lurked beyond his grasp, weaving deception like a spider spins silk. The cipher X49L2, Elliot Vane's shadow, and the crescent charm weighed on his mind, pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice steady as he addressed the assembled guests, summoned from their rooms despite the late hour. "Tonight we have seen fear drive action. Dr. Trent, Mademoiselle Beaumont, you sought a document that does not exist. Why? Because you believe it holds your secrets." Trent's jaw clenched. "I told you, Poirot, I was curious. Nothing more." Clara's eyes flashed. "And I was protecting myself. Langley's death, it's tied to my past, to Vane. I had to know what Trent was hiding." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Protection, mademoiselle, or destruction of evidence? Let us consider another possibility." He produced the scorched paper from his pocket, the cipher X49L2 glinting in the candlelight. "This was found near Monsieur Langley's body. A code, oui, but also a mirror, reflecting the truth back at the guilty." Lady Evelyn, seated near. Sir Reginald leaned forward. "What truth? You're speaking in riddles, Monsieur Poirot." "Non, madame," Poirot said, his eyes sweeping the room. "The riddle is unravelling. But now we face a new deception." He paused, then turned to Mrs. Finch, whose sharp gaze had not wavered. "Madam Finch, you have been silent, yet you see much. Yesterday you spoke of Langley's cheating at cards. But was there more? A confession, perhaps?" Mrs. Finch's lips curled faintly. "You're sharp, Poirot. Langley did boast to me, after too much wine, about outsmarting an old partner. Said he'd buried a man's name to save his own skin. Didn't say who." A murmur rippled through the room. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Elliot Vane, perhaps? A man whose disgrace haunts this house. He turned to Trent. "Doctor, you were in Cairo in 1915, as was Langley. Did you know Vane? Did you help bury him?" Trent's face darkened. "I won't be accused on guesses. Yes, I was in Cairo. Business, nothing more. Langley was a colleague, not a friend." Poirot's gaze shifted to Clara. "And you, mademoiselle, your bracelet missing a crescent charm, was it a gift from Langley? Or from Vane, a token of a past you hide?" Clara's hand flew to her wrist, her voice breaking. "It was my mother's. I lost the charm years ago. You can't prove anything." "Proof," Poirot said softly, "is in the pattern. Someone in this room has woven a web of lies, false confessions, planted clues. The clock was tampered with, the footprint left to mislead, the cipher placed to taunt. And now, I suspect, another mirror." He stepped toward the fireplace, where a large mirror hung, its surface reflecting the tense faces. "This house is full of mirrors, showing us what we wish to see. But the killer's reflection is distorted. They have made one mistake too many." Hastings, standing by the door, whispered, "You're close, aren't you, Poirot?" "Oui, Hastings," Poirot murmured. "But the killer knows it. They will act soon, perhaps tonight." As the guests were dismissed, their footsteps echoing in the hall, Poirot lingered, his eyes on the mirror. Trent's denial, Clara's panic, Mrs. Finch's cryptic hint, they were all reflections, but one was false. The cipher's letters danced in his mind, and a new thought struck. What if X4T9L2 was not a code, but a signature? A name, inverted, concealed. He slipped the crescent charm from his pocket, its silver glinting. The killer had left too many traces, believing them, buried in deception. But Poirot's little grey cells were polishing the mirror, and soon... Chapter 11. The Hour of the Hidden Blade. The midnight hour cloaked Ashbourne Hall in silence, broken only by the distant chime of a clock that no longer lied. Hercule Poirot moved through the darkened corridors, his steps silent as a cat's, the crescent charm and scorched cipher tucked safely in his pocket. The trap in the library had exposed Trent and Clara's fears, but Poirot knew the true killer was watching, waiting for a moment to strike again. His announcement of a hidden document had been a spark, and now he sensed the kindling catching fire. He had instructed Hastings to keep watch over the guests' rooms, but Poirot's instincts drew him to the conservatory, a glass-walled haven, filled with ferns and moonlight. It was a place of beauty, but also of shadows, perfect for a predator to stalk. The air was humid, heavy with the scent of earth and blooms. As he slipped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim glow, a faint rustle came from behind a cluster of palms. Poirot froze, his hand tightening around the silver charm. "Who is there?" he called softly, his voice steady but laced with challenge. No answer came, But the rustle grew sharper. A footstep, deliberate. Poirot stepped sideways, positioning himself near a wrought-iron bench, his senses alert. Then a flash of steel caught the moonlight, a blade, thin and wicked, slashing through the air where he had stood moments before. Poirot ducked, his agility belying his small frame, and the blade struck the bench with a metallic clang. A figure loomed, cloaked in a dark shawl, their face obscured. "You are too close, Monsieur Poirot," a voice hissed low and venomous. "Leave the shadows be." Poirot's heart raced, but his mind was ice. "Non, mon ami," he said, circling, slowly. "The shadows betray you. You strike because I see." The figure lunged again, but Poirot sidestepped, grabbing a heavy planter and shoving it into their path. It crashed, earth spilling across the tiles, and the figure stumbled, the shawl slipping to reveal a glimpse of pale skin and dark hair. Before Poirot could close the distance, they recovered, bolting through a side door into the garden. Poirot gave chase, the cold night air biting as he followed the fleeting silhouette across the lawn. The fog from days past was gone, but the darkness was thick, swallowing the figure near the woods. He stopped, panting slightly, his eyes scanning the trees. They were gone, but not without cost. At his feet lay the shawl, torn and abandoned, its hem embroidered with a faint initial. "E. Evelyn?" Poirot murmured, then shook his head. Or another echo of Vane? The initial could belong to anyone. Evelyn, Elliot, even a fabrication. But the blade had been real, its intent unmistakable. Returning to the house, Poirot found Hastings in the hall, his face pale. "Poirot, I heard a crash. Mrs. Finch is hurt." They hurried to the old woman's room, where she sat propped against pillows, a bruise blooming on her temple. Her eyes, sharp as ever, met Poirot's. "Someone pushed me," she rasped, "in the corridor, not 10 minutes ago. Wanted me quiet, I'd wager." Poirot's jaw tightened. "Did you see them, madam?" "Too dark," she said, grimacing. "But they smelled of lavender, strong like a woman's scent. Lavender." Poirot's mind flashed to Clara's perfume, Lady Evelyn's sachets, even the conservatory's blooms. The killer was striking now, desperate to silence those who knew too much. Mrs. Finch's survival was a stroke of luck, or a warning. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low. "Guard Madame Finch. No one enters this room tonight," as Hastings nodded. Poirot slipped away, the shawl in hand. The killer had misstepped, their blade missing its mark, their scent lingering. The cipher, the charm, the photograph, they were converging, and Poirot felt the net tightening. The hour of the hidden blade had passed, but dawn would bring. Chapter 12. Checkmate in the library. The library of Ashbourne Hall was ablaze with candlelight, its shadows banished as Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, facing the assembled guests. The air was taut, each breath heavy with anticipation and dread. The events of the night, Mrs. Finch's attack, the blade in the conservatory, the shawl marked with an E, had driven Poirot to this moment. The cipher X4T9L2, the crescent charm, the photograph of Langley and Vane, the tampered clock, all were threads he had woven into a net, and now he would draw it tight. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear as a bell. "Ayez Murderer walks among us, believing they have outwitted Hercule Poirot. They are mistaken. Tonight, in this room where Victor Langley fell, I will name them." Lady Evelyn gripped Sir Reginald's arm, her face pale. Dr. Trent stood rigid, his eyes darting to the door. Clara Beaumont's hands trembled, her wrist still bare. Mrs. Finch, bruised but defiant, sat with a steely gaze. Hastings guarded the entrance, his expression tense, but trusting in Poirot's method. Poirot held up the scorched paper, the cipher X4T9L2 catching the light. "This," he said, "was no mere note. It is a signature, inverted and disguised. Rearrange the letters, shift their values, and they whisper a name, Langley. But not Victor. Another from his past, Elliot Vane." A murmur rippled through the room. Poirot continued, his gaze piercing. Langley was Vane, hiding in plain sight after a scandal in Cairo. He betrayed partners, hoarded secrets, and came here to bury them. But someone knew, someone followed. He produced the crescent charm, its silver glinting. This was found in the woods, where a footprint led from the library. It belongs to a bracelet. Yours, Mademoiselle Beaumont. Clara gasped. "I told you. It was my mother's. I lost that charm years ago." "Oui," Poirot said, "but not by accident. You dropped it deliberately to mislead. You knew Langley's secret, did you not? Your mother was ruined by Vane's schemes, and you came here for revenge." Clara's eyes widened, but Poirot turned to Trent. "And you, Doctor, you were in Cairo with Vane. You profited from his fraud, then fled when he fell. Langley's presence threatened to expose you. Your alibi crumbled, your fear drove you to search the library." Trent's voice was hoarse. "I didn't kill him. I swear it." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience. There is another." His gaze settled on Lady Evelyn, who shrank back. "Madame, your letters to Langley were not friendship, but desperation. He held a debt over you, a loan from Vane's stolen funds. You feared ruin." Sir Reginald roared. "That's absurd!" "No," Poirot said softly. "It is fact. But the killer is not one motive, but a convergence." He stepped toward Mrs. Finch, whose lips twitched faintly. "Madam Finch, you saw Langley's deceit, yes, but you also recognized him as Vane. Your late husband was his victim, was he not? You came here not as a guest, but as a hunter." Mrs. Finch's eyes gleamed. "Clever, Poirot, but you've no proof." Poirot smiled, producing the shawl. This, marked with an E, was left in the conservatory. "Not Evelyn, but Edith. Your name, Madam Finch. The lavender scent, your fall in the corridor. A ruse to seem a victim. You struck Langley with the statuette, tampered with the clock, left the cipher to taunt me. You attacked yourself to deflect suspicion." The room was silent, all eyes on Mrs. Finch. She rose, her voice cold. "Langley destroyed my life. He deserved it." Poirot nodded. "Oui, but justice is not yours to wield. The charm, the footprint. They were Clara's, yes, but you used her fear, planting clues to confuse. You wrote the letter, believing you could outsmart me." Mrs. Finch's smile faded. "You can't prove it." "But I have," Poirot said, gesturing to Hastings, who held a small vial. "Lavender oil, found in her room. The blade, the shawl, Your own words, they betray you." As Hastings moved to restrain her, Mrs. Finch sat, defeated. Poirot's eyes softened. "Checkmate, madame. The game is over." The guests exhaled, the tension breaking like glass. Poirot stepped back, his little grey cells at rest, the library no longer a place of death. Chapter 13. The Almost Perfect Victory. The morning sun bathed Ashbourne Hall in a golden glow, but the warmth could not erase the chill of the previous night's revelations. Hercule Poirot stood in the garden, his polished shoes gleaming on the dew-kissed grass, his hands clasped behind his back. The case was closed, Mrs. Edith Finch confessed, and in custody, yet his mind lingered on the intricacies of her plan. Hastings joined him, his face a mix of relief and awe. "I say, Poirot," Hastings said, "that was a close one. She nearly had us fooled, nearly had you." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Oui, Hastings, nearly. But nearly is not enough against Hercule Poirot." They walked toward the rose arbour, where the scent of blooms mingled with the crisp air. Poirot's thoughts retraced the case, the anonymous letter, the tampered clock, the footprint, the cipher X49L2, the crescent charm, the shawl marked E. Each clue had been a stroke in Mrs. Finch's masterpiece, a crime she believed flawless. She had woven a tapestry of misdirection, using Clara's fear, Trent's guilt, and Evelyn's secrets to obscure her own hand. Her motive, Poirot mused aloud, was vengeance, pure and cold. Victor Langley, as Elliot Vane, ruined her husband, drove him to ruin and death. She waited years, plotting, until fate brought him here. She wrote the letter to draw me in, to test her skill against the great Poirot. Hastings frowned. But why? Why challenge you if she wanted to get away with it? Poirot paused, his eyes on a rose, its petals perfect yet fragile. Pride, mon ami. The mind of the true criminal craves recognition, even in secret. She saw her crime as art, a murder, so clever it would baffle even me. The cipher, the clues, they were her signature, daring me to see her. He recalled her confession in the library, her voice steady even as the net closed. She had admitted to striking Langley with the statuette, to planting Clara's charm, to staging her own attack. The lavender oil, her embroidered shawl, her knowledge of Vane's past, they had been her undoing. Yet Poirot felt no triumph, only a quiet respect for her audacity. "She was brilliant," he said softly. "The clock misled us, the footprint pointed to Clara. The cipher taunted us with Langley's old name. She used every suspicion, Trent's debts, Clara's revenge, Evelyn's debt, to build a maze. But a maze has an exit, and I found it." Tritingsture nodded. That shawl was the key, wasn't it? And the lavender, sloppy for someone so careful. "Non," Poirot corrected. "Not sloppy, inevitable. No crime is perfect, Hastings. The human heart betrays itself. A scent, a stitch, a moment of panic. She struck at me in the conservatory, believing I was too close. That was her mistake." They turned back towards Gers, the house where the guests were packing, their lives forever altered. Clara, freed of suspicion, wept for her mother's memory. Trent, shamed but innocent, planned to leave Kent. Lady Evelyn and Sir Reginald faced their fractured trust, and Mrs. Finch, in a cell miles away, awaited justice. As they reached the terrace, Hastings asked, "Do you think she'd have won, Poirot? Without that shawl, that vial?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, for a time. But the truth, it is like the sun. It rises, always. She was almost perfect, oui. But almost is a victory only in games. In life, it is defeat." He adjusted his hat, his step light despite the weight of the case. The letter's words echoed in his mind. "Watch the shadows. They move when you do not look." Mrs. Finch had been the shadow, but Poirot had never stopped looking, and so the game ended, not with her triumph, but with his. "Venez, Hastings," he said, smiling. "London awaits, and perhaps another